What is up, everybody? It's episode 26 of the Vish Kumaran show, and I'm here with a very special guest, a good friend of mine, and one of my favorite people now covering the 49ers, finished his second year covering the 49ers for Niners Nation, and that's my man, Jordan Elliot, Mr. Splash _ cousin himself. What is going on?
Oh, dude, it's Super Bowl Sunday. It's a beautiful day outside. We got football for barring the XFL and stuff. We have NFL football for the last time for the next few months. So I'm trying to soak it all in and enjoy it one last Sunday.
So it's funny you say that because, there's part of me that feels the exact same way as you, wants to soak in everything. And I am intrigued by a lot of things about this matchup. I studied it a little bit this week just because I wanted to see if I really wanted to watch it. But I'm still not over what happened last weekend. And I obviously I didn't participate. I don't play. I'm not over it as a fan, but I'm not over it as not a 49ers fan, as a football fan. I think we got robbed. The NFC was trash all year. All I wanted to see was those two heavyweights go at it. And instead of that, I didn't even get to see a football game. I'm not over it.
It just felt like everybody was cheated, and maybe Eagles excluded and Eagles fans excluded. Like, I'm sure they're not feeling that way. They shouldn't. They're in the Super Bowl, but you're right. Like, I didn't feel like it was like, oh, the 49ers as a fan, like, oh, this is terrible. It was literally just from an appreciation of the game of football. I'm like, dude, this was like the perfect matchup on paper. They both had such strong units in the trenches on both sides of the ball. You both had some creative offensive minds that are doing things that not too many other teams in the league are doing. And it felt like I've never watched a game, Vish, where it felt like it was over 5 minutes in the playoff game. Yeah. Even the most lopsided matchups, there's always some sort of way to keep you involved. And I can't remember ever having that feeling where it was like pity almost. Like, they literally could not execute a forward pass, and it's the second biggest game of the year outside of the Super Bowl. It's completely unprecedented. It just feels like the air got sucked out of what was a very special season. They're on a 12-game winning streak, and then it ends with the situation where you're running, scrambling to get Christian McCaffrey a mic to put it in his helmet because you have no other option at quarterback.
Right, exactly. And I think you put it in the best way possible, that we were robbed. And you said we were robbed as football fans. I felt bad for those players. You don't know how many opportunities. Look, we're going to talk a lot about the 49ers on today's show, and we're both fans of the 49ers. You cover the 49ers. But the thing about the 49ers, and a reality that has to set in as part of this conversation, is that there's no guarantee. As good as we think and we project them to be next year, there's no guarantee they're back here. And this is 3 out of 4 years they've made this deep playoff run, right? They've played almost 40 games in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And to have the heartbreak of last year, go to, the Rams, be so confident, be up 10 in the fourth quarter, kind of fall apart. And then, of course, there was the Tart dropped interception as well. And then you come back this year, and it's a better team this year than last year. You had a better season top to bottom, and you feel like this is your chance. And to have Brock Purdy go down 6 plays into the game I feel so bad for those players. And I have not – we can talk about this right now too and touch on it, because I know it's a conversation about how they've been talking this week. And in a lot of ways, I understand, because I don't think the way they've talked this week has necessarily just been that of how they should be talking. The best way to answer these questions is to, give the PC whatever answer, because, it leads to the criticism that they've gotten this week. But at the same time, I can't be critical of them for talking this way, because they're being honest and they're being genuine and they're showing how they truly feel. And that's all we ask for from players all the time, which is transparency. We want to know more about their lives. You want to know how much about what they really feel about things. We don't want them to just give us PC answers. And they've been honest, and I understand. While it's not exactly correct, I understand the feeling and the sentiment and why they're talking that way. It was a brutal way for them to have the season end, especially a season as magical as this year's was promised to be.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like you said, like, these guys are human beings, right? And I'm not saying that that's definitively what this is. I could definitely see a scenario where kind of talking through some of these things out loud is kind of therapeutic in a way, because they do feel probably like this was a chance that, they didn't get a fair shake at things. And I'm with you. I think that there is a path where you can kind of, hey, the Eagles played well, things didn't work out, we'll get them next year. But that's boring, man. Nobody wants to hear that. I want to hear what's really going on. I want to know how you're really feeling. And, the score was 31-7, but realistically, there was a couple penalties I thought the 49ers had where they could have been a little bit more disciplined. There was a couple penalties where I thought for a playoff game, I thought it was really ticky-tack stuff. But even in that first half, when Josh Johnson was under center and Purdy had already been out, it was a tie game late into the first half on the road against what had been the best team in the NFC. So it's really hard to fault these guys where they're like, we're literally on our fourth quarterback of the season. He gets hurt. We don't have a quarterback, and we still were in this game well into the early part of the second half. I think that the final straw was probably that fumble, I guess, maybe at the end of the first half. But even so, like when McCaffrey scored that touchdown and he bowled over, I forget who the defender was. Was it Gardner Johnson that he ran over?
Yeah. It was a combination of Gardner Johnson, and then it was, I think it was, who's their nickel? The guy that just came back, was it Devontae Maddox in the hole? I don't even. Yeah.
So, like, in that moment, like, who could fault anybody on that team for still thinking, hey, we have what it takes. We just got to find a way to win this game. Maybe in a couple weeks, Jimmy G's good to go, even if Purdy can't throw. So I can't fault those guys for, it felt like they held on to the belief that they still could win that game, even when it was blatantly obvious they had no chance. They didn't have a quarterback. You can't win in the NFL when you can't execute a forward pass. And so a couple of weeks removed from that, it's really hard to fault them. Like, what are they supposed to say? Like, oh, that they were the better team. Like, if you really don't feel like they were the better team, I would much rather you come out and say that and stir up the controversy than lie to give some politically correct response. And I'll be honest with you, I think if the Eagles lose this game today, it's only going to get louder. And the stuff from the 49ers players might get even more amplified. And it's kind of hard to fault them because at the end of the day, like, they had a really good team, and I don't expect them to roll over and just, concede the politically correct take and, be quiet for 6 months. That's just not realistic.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And before we move on to talking about, what the show is titled, which is obviously Bobby Slowik moving on, I did just see on Twitter that while we're on the topic, Deebo Samuel called James Bradberry trash, apparently. I don't know the full context of the tweet, but I just wanted to include it as part of the discussion. It seemed like it was on the I Am Athlete podcast with Brandon Marshall. I always really enjoy that podcast because of what we're talking about, right? It's a place where players feel a little more comfortable to express themselves, and there's a little more transparency and honesty. And so it's interesting to hear Deebo say that. If you have a little bit more knowledge on the clip, do you have any take on that, or should we move?
So I watched it real quick, and it was interesting because Deebo talked about how much respect he had for Darius Slay, and he's like, I respect Slay. I forget the exact quote, but he made sure to give props to Slay, and he just had mentioned like that play that Purdy got hurt on, how much separation Ayuk had. I don't know if maybe there's some stuff, maybe those guys talk a little trash to each other. Maybe there's a little bit of personal beef going on. But I did think it was interesting that he didn't take a shot at like the entire Eagles secondary. He did say that he thought the defensive line was the reason why the secondary was so good. And he was talking about how the guys up front were the reason why the guys in the back were all pros. But I do think, again, it's very interesting that he went out of his way to show respect to Darius Slay, but then turn around and called James Bradberry trash. So maybe there's something going on. He didn't say it in the, on the podcast, but maybe there's some underlying thing going on there, because to have that distinction, I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that is interesting, actually. That means I do think that something happened. There were a lot of tussles in that game. I'm assuming one of those tussles included Deebo Samuel and James Bradberry. The one thing I will say is, before we move on, I actually kind of disagree with some of the sentiment from the 49ers players this week that, their offense was just going to run all over the Eagles and expose their pass game. In a lot of ways, when I watched the first half of the game, even when Josh Johnson played, and obviously it's difficult to feel whether Josh Johnson was going to be able to function because he wasn't doing the rudimentary quarterback things right? Like getting them lined up. He wasn't able to do that. 3 delay of game penalties. He obviously couldn't catch the snap. He dropped it, and that was kind of the end of the game. But I actually felt like the Eagles defense had a really, really good plan, and they were planning to take away the middle of the field and take away all these in-breaking routes. And they were doing some nice things like cross-keying their safeties, right? Where they look like they're playing too high, but both safeties are really just playing just two robbers, picking off two crossers coming across, right? And we know 49ers love first window crosser followed by second window dig. something like that, right? And so they were taking away these in-breaking routes. So yes, that play to Ayuk, if Hassan Reddick doesn't make that play, might have been a big gain on an outbreaking route. But I thought overall, really, that even with a healthy Purdy, that was going to be a really grinded out kind of football game, because the Niners defense obviously had the goods and the plan, and they were going to be holding their end of the bargain. But I thought the Eagles defense, and we're going to talk about the Super Bowl a little bit too. I think it's a completely different matchup, but I thought the Eagles defense had a few advantages there, or I thought they had a decent plan on how they were going to stop the 49ers offense. So I don't know. While a lot has been said this week, and I agree with a lot of it, right? Like, we were robbed of a football game. The 49ers had no chance because of the Purdy injury and all of that. When I did watch the game, I did feel like I didn't feel like, hey, the 49ers were just going to run over these guys. Like, this was about to be 50-0. This was about to be, 30-15 or 30-10 or something like that, because the offense and the defense were having such a good plan. No.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think the main thing just right away was the Eagles did such a good job controlling the line of scrimmage. Like, the 49ers would have really had to grit out a tough win. And I'm with you. If they did win that game, if Purdy did stay healthy, it was going to be very close. It was going to be a down to the wire kind of thing. And, I can appreciate the amount of prep that goes into planning for a game like that and feeling good about the strategy you have. But yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a fine line between feeling like, hey, we felt like if we had a quarterback capable of executing this offense, we had a great plan that would have, put us in a good spot to win, versus like we would have tore apart, what's been the best pass defense in the NFL, and we would have dominated this team. At the end of the day, yeah, like, it sucks, but at the same time, like, the Eagles are a really good team. And I think what happens is it's either people are like, well, the 49ers got cheated and it doesn't count, or the Eagles ran them over. And I think that there's a middle ground of the Eagles had a really good football team and the 49ers were in a bad spot.
Right.
That combination just creates this insurmountable deficit that they just didn't really have a chance in.
Exactly. And I think that's really well put. And just to bring up a comment here, Randall Riley says Hurts couldn't hit anyone with accuracy down the field. Did you see that? I do think Hurts' shoulder is still a part of this conversation, especially when I look at how he's been throwing the ball today, post-injury, compared to how he was throwing it at the beginning of the season. He's not the world's greatest passing quarterback. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, but he did prove this year that he's a good enough decision maker within their zone read RPO pass game. He's really good at their quick game, right? They have a lot of RPOs based off of inside zone, a lot of throws to the bubble, a lot of inside zone RPOs out of 3-by-1 formations, a lot of stuff like that. And then he throws a great deep ball, great out route. So he's, to me, like, this is the new Russell Wilson. This is the better running, less creative Russell Wilson, right? He gets outside of the pocket to run. Russell Wilson got outside of the pocket to throw. But from inside of the pocket, maybe late in the down, processing in-breaking routes and routes coming open in front of their face, not their strength. But you want to talk about throwing the deep ball, throwing fades, throwing outs, throwing sails with accuracy. To me, Jalen Hurts does that with pretty great consistency. And then he's the best red zone runner I've seen from the quarterback position since Cam Newton. And that is very important because Philadelphia's offense is very good in the red zone. So that's kind of my take on Hurts. Not that anyone asked, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think Jalen Hurts is a guy where, I would be lying if I thought he would be second in MVP voting and is, this early on in his career. But from his time at Alabama to Oklahoma, one thing that I think always stood out that will typically transfer over into the NFL is just the work ethic and the dedication the guy had to getting better. And when you hear guys like Nick Saban and Lincoln Riley, even before he was in the NFL, talk about the amount of time he put into improving, I think that's where you're seeing this tangible jump in all those things that you mentioned. And I think that he is a guy where, I'm not saying that guys who get drafted in the top 5 aren't going to work hard, but I think there is something to be said when you have a guy who is taken with a, second round pick, who isn't handed the starting job right away. Like, there's a little bit more hunger there to get better and to really, hone in on those things that are going to get you on the field early, which, as you mentioned, was his running ability, his ability to improvise. But I think that players deserve a lot of credit. We always talk about, like, the coaches that develop these players, right? And which coach is responsible for this player getting better. And I think rarely the conversation shifts towards the amount of work that Jalen Hurts probably has had to put in the last couple of years to get better doing all those things you mentioned. So I think that part of what makes Jalen Hurts so special is that intangible dedication to want to be the best he can be. And I forget if it was you or somebody mentioned the other day, I thought it might have been you. I apologize if it wasn't, because I was just scrolling through Twitter, that, like, we've seen Jalen Hurts get better year after year, and he hasn't really, like, plateaued or, like, reached a point where you're like, all right, like this is probably the ceiling. But I forget who it was. It was somebody on 49ers Twitter, I think, when I was scrolling down. But I think that was a great point. Like, he has gotten better year after year after year, and he's putting the Eagles in a spot where it was like, all right, we have a cost-controlled guy on a rookie deal. We could, we're very flexible with our roster. To now, it's like, are we going to pay this guy $50 million a year? Like, he's really put them in a position where, in the span of a year and a half or so, like, he's looking like a legitimate franchise quarterback, and it's hard to argue against that. And
I said this about him. I didn't say that, but I do think that is a great point. So shout out to whichever.
I forget who it was. My fault. I know why I thought it was you, but
said that. I have said this about him, and I guess we'll talk about the game right here, and we'll talk about what you think is going to happen, and then we'll move on to Bobby Slowik. But I have, and this is a little bit I didn't think it was controversial, but it turned out to be a little bit controversial. I've never seen a quarterback improve like this. When you take even his, where he was his freshman year at Alabama to where he is now, it's unheard of. Mm-hmm. And when you even go from he couldn't throw at Alabama to he could kind of throw at Oklahoma to he came into the NFL and they were running this college offense really based on his running. They didn't ask much of him in the pass game. He wasn't doing a lot of stuff in terms of decision making or a lot of reading out stuff. And then his accuracy was only really there, right? He could throw. When he started off, he could really throw to the right and he could throw deep to the right. He did that very well. And now you look at how much he's added to his game as a passer, as a decision maker, in terms of playing with, timing, touch, accuracy. And then when you look at their offense, what Shane Steichen has brought and the evolution of, they've taken the zone read and they've kind of made it unguardable by adding an RPO throw option out of it, right? So you have the zone read. Most teams scrape exchange the zone and read, right? So the end crashes, will linebacker pulls across. Now quarterback, you make the will linebacker make the play on the quarterback. Well, they leak out a tight end to the flat a lot, right? And they have this inside zone built with the flat RPO. And he gets to really, if the linebacker shoots for Hurts, he dumps it out to the flat. If you stay on the tight end, Hurts is going to run. And they do little things like this where it just turns into math and numbers. For them and for him reading it out. And I've never seen anybody improve at the quarterback position the way he's improved. A lot of people say Josh Allen. I don't know. I don't think Josh Allen's development track was this drastic. I think a lot of people thought Josh Allen would develop, and a lot of people didn't. Hurts, I don't think anybody expected him to be an MVP candidate year 3. And I would love to touch on the game and go there. And so obviously Hurts is much improved, but he's playing the boogeyman on the other side. To me, he's the best. I've already said it. He's the best quarterback ever. I know that I'm young. I know a lot of people won't agree with that opinion, but to me, from what I've seen, and of course I can only go off who I've seen, I've never seen anybody this good at just playing the position of quarterback. It's not about winning. It's not about results. He plays the position at a higher level than anybody I've seen. And so what do you think is going to happen in this game? I know a lot of people are probably itching at the TV, or maybe they're not itching at the TV because they're here listening to us probably talk about Bobby Slowik in 10 minutes. So maybe 15 if this continues, if I just keep going on and on. But what do you think is going to happen in this game? Who do you like to win this game? And what are you really looking for in this matchup?
I'll be honest with you, Vish, this has been one of the harder Super Bowls for me to have a strong opinion on who I think is going to win that I can remember in years. I started out kind of leaning Philadelphia just because I'm still very committed to the mindset. If you can win up front, if you have a strong offensive line, you have a strong defensive line, typically that's going to translate the farther you get into the playoffs and ultimately on this stage. And I think Philadelphia is just exceptional. The way they've built that offensive line, the way that Lane Johnson's continuing to play through injury. Jason Kelce might be the best center I've ever seen. They're fantastic. And then obviously the defensive line speaks for itself. They have guys like Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox and Hassan Reddick. They're just so stacked on that side. But Patrick Mahomes is kind of in that, rarefied air of for years it was always don't bet against Tom Brady, right? No matter what, don't throw money out there and bet against Tom Brady. And I feel like Mahomes has rightfully earned that, distinction of even when he's out there on one foot, which it feels like he's been for the majority of this postseason, he's still better than pretty much every other quarterback in the league, which is absurd to think. There's a lot of really talented quarterbacks, and Mahomes on one healthy ankle I'd still take him over anybody else. And the thing that's really swaying me towards Kansas City, where I'm leaning now and I'm going to commit to before the game, is Andy Reid with a bye week to prep, a couple weeks before a big game like this to prep, is just elite and in a tier of his own. And we obviously saw, 49ers fans remember he got really creative with some stuff in that Super Bowl a couple years ago. And I can't bet against Mahomes, and I can't bet against Andy Reid with 2 weeks to game plan for an opponent like this. And I think the storyline of it being his former team and some of the other things make it a little bit more interesting. It's close, but I would lean Kansas City, and I'm gonna stick to the Mahomes, Andy Reid, narratives for my ultimate reasoning. And I'm trying not to flip flop right before we get to kickoff, so I'm gonna commit to the Chiefs, and I'm sticking to that.
And like you, I've been flip-flopping the entire 2 weeks. I think this matchup is a lot more complex than really great team playing against the great quarterback, great coach. Because I think Kansas City is a really, really good team. To me, this is the best team Kansas City has brought to the Super Bowl with Mahomes. Not the most explosive offense, but the best all-around team. And when I look at it that way, I ultimately am picking Kansas City to win this game. I think there's certain matchups that just favor them. For example, I think Kansas City has real size on the interior of their defensive line. Obviously, Chris Jones, to me, is the best defensive player in football right now. I think he took that mantle from Aaron Donald. I thought it would be Micah Parsons or Nick Bosa, but wire to wire this season, Chris Jones has been the best defensive player in the NFL, especially when you look at how he's played in the playoffs, how he played last week. To me, I would say that. Now, Bosa had a better regular season, but Jones had a better regular season plus playoffs. And when you look at him and you look at, the other guys they have between Karlaftis and Frank Clark, they have real size across their defensive line. You look at the two teams Philly played in the playoffs prior. The Giants have a big interior defensive line and small ends, and so Philadelphia was able to run the football on the outside against them. 49ers have big ends and size across their defense, but they're a little smaller in their interior defensive line. Kinlaw and Armstead is their only really size, and Kinlaw had a rough game against Philadelphia. He had a rough playoffs in general. And the other guys on the 49ers defensive line, whether it's McGill, they missed Hassan Ridgeway, obviously, whether it's McGill, whether it's Givens. These guys are, more gap shooters. They're more guys that get into the backfield and penetrators rather than just big DJ Jones, 325 pounds. I'm going to hold up two guys. I'm going to take on double teams. I'm going to beat, to win my gap even after taking on double teams. So when I look at it like that, I just look at this matchup and I think they're going to have a little bit more success against the run game than either of those two teams had. And I thought the 49ers played the run game very, very well. And then I like their linebackers a lot. I think Gay and Bolton is the most underrated linebacking core in the league. They're going to fly around and make plays. And ultimately, I do think they can play man coverage a little bit more than San Francisco was able to. Now, they're not as good a zone team as San Francisco, but they can play man a little bit more. And when they do play zone, Spags is going to be creative, and they're going to play a lot of cover too, as they always do. And they're going to force Jalen Hurts to make decisions and play from the pocket. And I think when they do that, they're going to have success against this Philadelphia offense. And then when you look at their offense, right, it's a tough matchup in a lot of ways. Their tackles have not played well in Reddick, Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat. It's Robert Quinn. It's going to be a lot to handle. But to me, Mahomes, how efficient he's played, Andy Reid going to those 2 tight end, 3 tight end stuff because those receivers got hurt against Cincinnati in that second half. Pacheco, their ability to run the ball. And then just Mahomes and Kelsey, their connection on 3rd and long. Mahomes' ability to just navigate the pocket even with one leg. And then the throwing, obviously, is unreal. And his ability to manipulate underneath defenders and Kelsey's ability to find the soft spot and be on the same page with him. I just think this is going to be a Kansas City victory. I think wire to wire, they've been the best team in football. Philadelphia was I thought maybe for a little bit, but they had a little bit of a drop off. Kansas City had no drop off wire to wire throughout the season. I think they're the best team. They're going to win the Super Bowl. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do it by a little bit more than just a field goal. I wouldn't be shocked if they win by 7 or 10.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And I think the problem with Kansas City, like the perception of them, is that because Mahomes is so great and Andy Reid is this brilliant offensive mind, that a lot of those things you mentioned about the defense get swept under the rug. And a guy like Spagnuolo, who's been, I think a top 5 defensive coordinator the last few seasons, and his ability to improvise and adapt mid-game and to, really hone in on, what his team does really well and kind of, find that identity along the way throughout the course of a year, I think is extremely underrated. Even guys like Frank Clark, right? Like Frank Clark is has arguably been the best defensive player in the postseason since the Chiefs got him back in 2019.
Right.
And he's the guy, when we talk about all these great edge rushers, there's so many in the league right now. Frank Clark's name's never really at the top, but when the lights are the brightest, he's a guy who typically is showing up time and time again. So, I'm fascinated to see how guys like him and Chris Jones are going to be able to match up against that Eagles offensive line, which is very, very strong in its own right. But I'm with you. I think Kansas City's defense doesn't get enough credit, and the totality of the roster. Yes, they lost Tyreek Hill, but the roster 1 through 53 is as strong as it's ever been, and I'm with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you ready to talk Bobby Slowik? You think we covered the Eagles, the 49ers, or the Eagles, the Super Bowl enough? I think we did. Maybe a little too much. I got a little excited talking about Jalen Hurts there. But obviously the 49ers lost Bobby Slowik. It's funny because I saw Rich Madrid, good friend of both of ours, tweet, it doesn't mean a damn thing that they lost Bobby Slowik. And then I saw Billy M, who covers the Carolina Panthers, another friend of ours. He posted the reaction in 2021 to the Jets hiring Mike LaFleur as their offensive coordinator, and how many fans were like, this is the biggest loss ever, blah, 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 blah. And the 49ers offense was probably the best it's been under Shanahan this year, especially the second half of this year, especially when Brock Purdy took over. So not to discredit Bobby Slowik or anything he's done or all the, things he's done for the 49ers over the last few years that he's been working here. But what do you think? Is this a big loss, or do you agree with Rich? And do you feel like the 49ers will be okay without Bobby Slowik?
I think that I'm somewhere in the middle, right? Like, I think the 49ers are going to be okay as long as Kyle Shanahan's there. Ultimately, he's always going to be the guy that has the most pull. And I think that as long as he is there, he's shown a really just incredible ability to not only, develop coaches on the coaching staff. Like, you look at a guy like Slowik, who started out as a quality control coach on the defensive side of the ball, worked his way up to passing game coordinator. Now he's an OC. So not only is Kyle able to, have the respect to bring in guys like maybe Anthony Lynn from the outside into these roles, he's also showed an ability to really develop these guys, identify talent, and have them work their way up within the organization. So until proven otherwise, I'm just going to assume that there's somebody waiting in the wings who's going to be able to step in. And while it may not be a seamless transition and there might be some growing pains, the track record for the 49ers under Shanahan is just too strong to doubt that they will, that they're going to be able to find somebody that can fill those shoes. I will say, though, that, Bobby Slowik was the passing game coordinator this year, and with 3 different quarterbacks during the regular season, that Josh Johnson had a limited amount of snaps, so I don't really like lumping it in with the full big picture here. But with the 3 different quarterbacks, I thought the passing game looked as good as it's looked in the entire 6 years Shanahan's been here. I thought the quarterbacks looked more comfortable. I thought the game plan looked much more consistent week to week. And, how much of that was Bobby Slowik, I don't know, but I think he does deserve some share of credit being the passing game coordinator and having the passing game look as good as it did this year. So, yeah, I think it definitely is a loss to an extent, but is it something where you're going to sit here and you're going to be, up at night frantically worrying about how the 49ers are going to be able to effectively throw the ball next year? Like, no, I don't think so at all. And I think especially the fact that Greasy's still there, and the fact that, again, it's all going to come back to Shanahan. If Shanahan leaves and takes a head coaching job somewhere else, or for whatever reason that marriage isn't the same a few years down the line, yes, the sky is falling. I think that it would be time to hit the panic button. But these assistants can keep leaving, and I just am going to always assume that the next person is going to step up, and it's going to be this kind of near seamless transition.
Ultimately, I think that's the correct take. In the sense that I just feel like, obviously, as long as Shanahan's there, the sky is never going to be falling. The 49ers are going to find a way to be good on offense. Now, I think where the loss is getting a little bit diminished is it just reduces the number of people Shanahan can rely upon. And it creates an opportunity for him to, have to teach somebody else or get somebody else acclimated to doing this role, and there's a learning curve to doing these roles, right? Like Slowik to me was better this year, or the pass game looked better this year in a lot of ways in how they were game planning their pass game and how they were attacking certain coverages than it was last year. And some of it could have been Greasy. Some of it could have been the quarterback play. Just they run same concepts, right? They run a lot of the same concepts, but it's how they pair them together, what coverages they run certain concepts against. I thought it was a little bit cleaner this year than it was last year. But I think ultimately there is going to be another guy coming in. And that's what you said, right? Shanahan has this incredible gift to coach his coaches. And that's where I go back to Mike Shanahan. He did an interview with his wife before the 2019 divisional playoff game. It's on NBC, so everybody can go watch it. Before the 2019 divisional round game versus the Vikings. And he talks about the importance of coaching your coaches. And he talks about how he told Kyle, and he would do the same thing, where he would record all the positional coaches meetings and all of that and watch them back. And the reason he would do that is because in order for your coaches to be able to deliver the message that you want and have your message be delivered, they need to be able to know exactly what you want, and you have to teach them to deliver that message. And in theory, right, it makes so much sense, but I guess the way he described recording these meetings and doing that, it's not something everybody does. And so Shanahan is awesome at it, right? We've seen how many coaches he's developed, how many coaches have moved on, whether it's D'Amico, whether it's Robert Saleh, Matt LaFleur, Mike LaFleur got an OC job, Mike McDaniel, now Bobby Slowik. There's so many different people that he's helped. And I think the next and brought along and, developed and got them ready to do the next job. It's been a little New England-ish with Belichick, where they don't hire from outside. They keep promoting from within and have guys move forward within the organization. And so when you look at that, I do think the next guy is Brian Fleury, the new tight ends coach, right? He started as a quality control, so I'm assuming he was Shanahan's quality control. And usually if you're Shanahan's quality control, you're the guy that moves up. I don't know if you've noticed that, but McDaniel was his quality control. LaFleur was his quality control. The other LaFleur was his quality control. So I'd assume Brian Fleury, the tight end coach, is going to be maybe added a pass game tag to it at some point. That's what obviously Chris Forrester's role was elevated to with Mike McDaniel gone. He got the run game coordinator tag added to the offensive line duties. So just as a look at the staff, obviously I don't really know the details of who does what within, and that's why speculating about the loss of Bobby Slowik in some ways is a meaningless exercise, because we're not sure what they expect of Bobby Slowik on a week-to-week basis and how that's going to be replaced. But if I had to guess, I had to look at the coaches from afar and just, take a gander at it, I think Brian Fleury is going to be the kind of next replacement there.
Yeah, and one thing I just remembered. When I was in the Pro Bowl last week, I talked to George Kittle a little bit, and we were talking about just Shanahan. They've both been there for the entirety of Kittle's career. Shanahan's been there their tenures have been intertwined. And I asked him, kind of like, how have you seen kind of Kyle kind of grow as a coach, right? Like, what are some things you've noticed maybe that's going on now that didn't necessarily happen right away? And he said that one thing he's noticed that Kyle's gotten really good at is having one common theme in the building week to week, whether for a specific opponent or a specific goal they're chasing. And he says he thinks he does a really good job at every level of the team. So that's, on the defensive side of the ball, offense, special teams, right, of really getting one common message for that game prep week to week. And I'm wondering how much of that does factor into the success that a lot of these guys are having with, stepping into these new roles and coming in, right, where there is some continuity from top to bottom. And it's not just like, all right, well, you're in this role, go handle the passing game while we focus on this. It's this, consistent across the board. Here's our message for the week. We're all buying into this. And then the next week, obviously it changes based on the opponent. But that's something now that I'm thinking about that really does, to me, seem like a big deal, that his ability to really, like Kittle was talking about, how his ability to kind of like simplify things and get everybody to buy in on the same thing for a given opponent has really led to a lot of the success they've had. And I'm wondering if that's making life easier for these guys going from quality control to a positional coach to a pass game specialist and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there 100%. And I think that's a very interesting point you brought up. Nice to see you sharing some of the wealth of insight that you must have gotten from your time at the Pro Bowl. How was that, by the way? How did you like being there?
I'll be honest, it was really fun, and the players really seemed to enjoy it. All the guys I talked to seemed to really appreciate that they could be competitive and they could have this environment where they were competing with one another and they were invested in it, but they didn't have to worry about turning up field the wrong way and having an injury that's going to affect them going into next year or affect their ability to enjoy their offseason. And I don't know what it was like on TV. I heard some people, there was mixed reactions. They didn't really like it. But the energy inside the stadium was great. Like, there was probably 50,000 people at Allegiant. There was a lot of representation across the league. And a few people I spoke to had flown in just to watch, the players on their team participate in it. So I think it's something that would be great going forward. And I think that the more stuff they do, like the dodgeball and the thing they were doing with the offensive linemen, the move the chains thing, like things like that gets everybody involved, the more chance they're going to have of sustaining the success with this. I asked Trent Williams about it. Trent Williams has been named to 10 Pro Bowls. He's, seen every kind of version of a Pro Bowl you could possibly experience. And I asked him, like, hey, did you have fun out there? I know it's not, there's not as much going on for the big guys with the flag football and all that. He said he had a great time. And I asked him if he thought that this is something that not only the NFL could sustain going forward, but if it was something that he would want to participate in, given the fact he's likely going to continue to be named to Pro Bowls as long as he's playing football. And he was 100% in. Like, I was shocked, honestly, Vish, at the amount of these guys that were in.
Hopefully he doesn't have to go.
Yeah, there was a couple of these guys. I'm not naming names that definitely weren't as chipper about being there. But for the most part, they all seem to have a really good time doing it. I think the biggest thing, too, is speaking on the 49ers players specifically, all those guys all week were together hanging out. And you can tell there's a really strong bond there. So to get the chance to kind of blow off some steam after such a tough loss, I think is another reason why this format might have some success going forward. It gets everybody in the same room. And it's incredible, watching the respect that these guys have for one another. Like, I talked to Roquan Smith, and I was asking him about, Fred Warner a little bit, and he was talking about how, much it meant to him to get the chance just to talk shop with Fred Warner and pay the respects to one another. So I'm for the Pro Bowl going forward, and I think that they should find a way to keep it going as long as they can. I don't like the idea of just scrapping it all together, because I think there is something special to having 90% of the elite talent in the league all in the same area at the same time, just based on – it's great for me, I'll be honest. In the content business, it's great because it gives you stuff to talk about. But I think that the players' enjoyment in it played a big factor. And I don't know if you could tell me if you could feel it kind of through the TV, but in the stadium, like, it felt competitive, dude. Like, that last flag football game, like the intensity was ratcheting up. Fans were getting into it. They were yelling and stuff. So I like it, dude. I think they should keep it.
Yeah, I'm going to be 100% honest with you, buddy. I followed your coverage. You provided fantastic coverage throughout the Pro Bowl, so shout out to that. But I didn't watch a minute of Pro Bowl week, and I didn't watch a minute of the Pro Bowl. I have zero interest in it. It's not something that interests me. I took some of the week to decompress and let off a little steam and not have to watch so much football, because over the course of the week in the season, just to keep up with, talking about it and all of that, it's a grind. It's a lot of football I end up watching. And so I took like a couple days to stop, and then I started doing my initial draft research, where I just started actually my watching couple days ago, actually, for the draft. I started yesterday, but I started doing the prep of like who all I wanted to watch, who's kind of projected to go high, what are some of the initial takes on some of these people, just looking at some of my old draft stuff. What did I do wrong? How do I improve that when I go through it this time? So I was busy doing that. So sorry about that. I didn't watch the Pro Bowl. I can't comment on whether the new format is good or not, but I'll take Trent Williams' word for it. Hopefully he doesn't have to play in another Pro Bowl, though.
Yeah, and I thought that it added a little, like, if you're going to do this, make it fun is ultimately the way I looked at it. And it may not have been perfect, but I think it was much better than watching guys not tackle each other and Mac Jones running 75 yards untouched up the middle and grittying in the end zone like he did last year. Like, if you're not going to commit to the, football and pads, pivot and find something else. I thought they did as good a job as they could have with that.
That's fair. The freak is asking, or freak, excuse me. I called him the freak. He's just freak. He's not Javon Curse, but he said, "Is that a firefighter helmet in the background, Vish?" No, it's not. It's actually a red 49ers hat, and then a gray, like, the old Shanna hat, the gray Shanna hat. Yeah, so my sister got it for me for Christmas. So, like, it's those two hats back to back. It's the first time I think my background has been noticed. Usually it's just the old white walls look. Usually whoever I'm streaming with tells me, "Hey, Vish, blink twice if you're held as a captive." So I'm glad that the hats made the cut this time inside the entire picture. But Jordan, I haven't seen you tweet about this. I was giving you a little bit of a hard time before the show because I haven't really gotten your opinion on this. I swore that I wouldn't talk about it until the offseason, and then I've been talking about it since the offseason started. I think it's still something that's going to be very fluid on how I talk about it, because as more information comes to me, my opinions may change. But I do have, and by the way, the topic is the 49ers quarterback conversation, if anybody wasn't sure, of course. I mean, we're talking about the 49ers. When are we not talking about their quarterbacks? But so I've kind of settled my opinion at this. To me, Brock Purdy did enough this year where if he comes to camp healthy, he's going to be the starter. There's no doubt about it based on how he played this year. Trey Lance is going to be the number 2 option. Now, I don't necessarily think that by coming to camp as the starter, and I want to keep reiterating this, that means Brock Purdy is the 49ers' long-term future quarterback. I think it just means that right now he's ahead of Trey Lance. Whether Brock Purdy plays the entirety of the year will remain on his health and whether he can maintain the level of play he showed last year, which was excellent. And if he does that, to me, he might be their long-term guy. But we need to see that consistency. And the way I see it for Trey Lance is his story isn't written. He's still 23 years old. He's still young and cheap. And there's an opportunity for him where if he improves this offseason, Brock Purdy's injury, we don't know the timeline yet. We're not 100% sure. We think he'll be back for training camp. But obviously, as Brock Purdy said, the surgeon might have to call the audible when he goes inside to repair his UCL in 10 days. And so given that, there is an opportunity. And to me, that opportunity actually puts the onus on Trey Lance. Now he's going to be able to get the reps and get to start. And if he plays really well and shows the necessary improvements and polishes in certain areas, then maybe he's the guy of the future. But I think right now, what the 49ers have is ultimate flexibility, where they have 2 cheap guys who may possibly both could be the franchise guy. Maybe one could be the long-term starter. But there's also the possibility neither could be the starter or the franchise guy as well. And I think we got to talk about all of that. And so where do you stand on the 49ers quarterback situation? Do you think the way I laid it out is fair? And ultimately, who do you think is going to start? Or who do you – yeah.
Yeah, I think you're 100% fair. And I think there's this big distinction, right, where people think if you lean one way, you just are completely writing off the other guy, right? And I think the thing that we need to look at is decisions are going to be made based on the sample size we've seen, because that matters a lot, right? Yeah. Like what these guys do in camp is important, what they're doing in the offseason is important, but really the most important thing is what they're putting on tape against NFL defenses. And the realistic, outcome here is that we've seen much more of Brock Purdy against NFL defenses than we have against Trey Lance. And he and the 49ers looked really good when he was out there. I thought that I said this after, I think the Bucs game, or maybe it was after his first start. He looked more comfortable to me than any quarterback operating within the scheme of Kyle's offense and working within structure and just being decisive and distributing the ball, which is really what they've needed. They've really just needed an effective point guard this whole time, right? Somebody that consistently limit the turnovers and get the ball in the hands of this all-star group of playmakers. And so having said that, that doesn't mean that Trey Lance is incapable of doing it, or I don't think he will do it. I just think that it's really hard when you've had the success with a guy like Brock Purdy to just pivot back to Trey Lance automatically. And, we're going to hear quarterback competition and all these sort of things. Right. But realistically, I don't think that would have been the case had this injury not happened. I think the injury is what made this open up a little bit more. I strongly feel like if Brock Purdy had just been healthy and maybe they lost a close game to Philadelphia, he would have been the guy all throughout the offseason. And again, I think it just comes back to, I think George Kittle touched on it earlier this week. It's not that Trey Lance isn't capable of being the guy. It's just that unfortunately things, go a certain way and guys get hurt or they miss time. And it's really hard until you are given a reason to move off of a guy like Purdy to abruptly just move off of him. And I think the only strong argument you could really make at this point is potential, because Trey Lance has some physical tools that I don't think that Brock Purdy and many NFL quarterbacks don't have. He's very athletic, has a huge arm. You can definitely see the ceiling there and the draft capital that the 49ers invested. But I also think that, at a certain point, that only carries so much weight. And I personally don't like the draft capital argument, because I think ultimately you just need to put out the guy that gives you the best chance to win. And at the end of the day, Brock Purdy won every single game that he started and finished as the starting quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. So it's really hard for me to feel like something's going to just happen. Like the thing that I noticed, Vish, was that people kept talking about regression with Purdy and he's going to come back down to earth and this is going to happen. And in my eyes, I was kind of like, he came in and the floor is this high. What's going to stop him from getting better and feeling more comfortable and being able to identify some things pre-snap, being able to understand when he's, being baited by a certain coverage to throw a ball, just things that come with experience. So I think it's Purdy's. I think the guys that spoke this week put it as well as they could have. It's his job to lose, but that also means that there is an avenue for Trey Lance to come in and really wow everybody and be the quarterback that I believe the 49ers had to have confidence he was going to be when they moved all that capital for him.
Right.
So I'm all for the competition. I do think ultimately if he's healthy, Purdy's going to be the guy. And I just think it really comes down to, from what I've seen, I think he just has better instincts playing the position. And maybe Lance will develop those. And I'm not saying I don't think he's capable of doing it, but I just think it would be foolish on my end to ignore what I've seen and just assume that one guy is going to get drastically better while the other has a major regression. I just think from what we've seen, Purdy's the guy to lead this team right now. And I'm very interested to see if that changes. I'm not standing firm on that and saying that I'm not going to budge. If Trey Lance has a very impressive camp, if he looks really good during the offseason, he has every right to come and take this job and be that guy. I just don't think that that's something that people should count on, which is what it feels like, kind of. Like it feels like people are just like assuming that this monumental lead.
Right. I agree. Dangerous. And I agree with that. And I want to touch on quite a few things that you said. The first thing's right. I've been saying from the moment he played against Miami, I was blown away. I was blown away with how he played against Miami. I think the first play he came in against Miami, they had a zero pressure, and he found his hot. And he did that like 6 different times in the Miami game. He made a few throws, and at that point, you knew kind of like, okay, I didn't know what the ceiling was with this guy, anything like that, but I knew, okay, this guy is a starter. He can play. He knows how to play. And I think that was clear from the entire time he played, and he played very, very well. Now, the issue is he's got a quite serious injury, and the 49ers have a lot of capital invested in Trey Lance. And I hate the buzzword of QB competition because, to me, QB competition, one, when you run that entire circus of a QB competition, it never works. I've never seen a team succeed at doing it in an offseason except for Seattle this year. And it's kind of weird how that works. But to me, nobody gets enough reps. It turns into this circus. It turns into this media thing. The team doesn't know who to be behind. I think it is not good. But I think using that word diminishes the fact that they're competing every day. And that's where I think Brock Purdy is ahead right now. As small as Trey Lance's sample size has been, Brock Purdy also did things you talked about from an instinct standpoint, just from a decision-making standpoint and accuracy standpoint, more consistently than Trey Lance did in the small sample we got to see him. Now, is that an indictment of where Trey Lance will be 5 years from now? No. It's just an opportunity to present the places that Trey Lance needs to grow to become the guy the 49ers thought he could be and think he could be because they traded that much up for him, right? And so the way I see it is that there is this idea of competing every day. I think Brock Purdy is ahead and he proved enough to be the starter. But it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean the door is closed on Trey Lance. And to me, Brock Purdy is going to have to prove every day that he's still the starter and he's that guy. And Trey Lance is going to get the opportunity to outplay him. And if he does outplay him, I think the team will be behind Trey Lance. They just don't want him to get the job, I think, without him proving that he can outplay Brock Purdy because of the body of work, right? When you go 7-0 with a quarterback, you go on the kind of run they did, you have the kind of offensive momentum they had, it's really hard to replace him. And it's not, one person likes this person better situation. It's just, that was the situation and you have to let it ride out. We're going to talk about this a lot more throughout this offseason. I hope to have you on a few more times if time permits for you. So I know we're going to talk about it more in depth, but I just feel like there's certain people rooting for certain things rather than just talking about what's there for what it is. And I think it's okay. You can love Trey Lance. I like Trey Lance a lot. Heck, how can you not love Trey Lance after the way he answered questions in the Rich Eisen interview? But also understand that there's a process that he needs to go through to develop. We've seen, I don't think the 49ers have seen anything from him in the time he's been here to say, well, they were wrong about his draft evaluation, right? He's been who they thought they were, who they thought he was in terms of who he is as a person, right? And the physical, tangible skills are every bit like the arm is as strong as you thought they were. He's as big as you thought they were. Like he is who you thought he was. He's also as raw as you thought he was. And that's where he does need some time and he does need to go through that refinement. Maybe he goes through it this offseason. That's awesome. But if he doesn't, you have a guy who's playing at a starting caliber level. And like you said, people talk about the ceiling. I think you brought up a great point in the sense that Brock Purdy still has time to grow. He's also 23 years old. Sure, he's never going to get taller. He's never going to get faster, but there's ways he could play faster, right? His mind moves faster. He knows where to go with the ball faster. You can play faster by gaining experience without necessarily getting faster. And I think there's a lot of growth there for him as well. And I don't think it's fair to table it and say, well, this is what quarterback he's going to be. This is who he's going to be. This is what he's going to be. And because growth is something we cannot measure in the NFL, right? People put caps on growth all the time in the NFL, and a lot of players exceed the ceiling that you put on them. And then people put unlimited ceilings on growth, right? With a guy like Trey Lance, for example. And sometimes, there might not even be a path for them to reach that unlimited ceiling that you're putting on them, not specific to Trey Lance, players in general. And so when you're talking about all these details, I just feel like the conversation gets a little bit more biased. It gets a little bit more colluded. But if we're talking about for the facts and where they are right now, to me, Brock Purdy has clearly proven that he can walk into the camp as the starter, and Trey Lance, if he's healthy, right? And Trey Lance would be the backup, but he's going to have to earn throughout camp, preseason, whatever, the right to continue to keep starting. And just as, if Trey Lance was if it was the opposite situation and Trey Lance was the starter, he would also have to earn week to week to week the ability to start the next week.
Absolutely. And I think the thing with Purdy too is that we as fans, people covering this, outside observers that aren't 49ers fans, just NFL fans, I think everybody was kind of taken by surprise at just how Purdy came in and was, this offense didn't miss a beat. I think you could argue they improved. But I think one thing that stood out, and it's a shameless plug, but if you guys want to check it out, I wrote an article for Niners Nation last week about when these players really saw something special in Purdy. And so I talked to George Kittle about it. I talked to Fred Warner about it. I talked to Talanoa Hufanga about it. And all of these guys, KP, Kyle Pudsey made a great point how their ability to recollect, certain things is incredible. Immediately off the top of their head, they all had something they could go back and point to where they're like, what, this guy kind of has it. For Fred Warner, it was during OTAs, which, is typically a pretty relaxed thing. It's the team getting back together. You're not in pads. You're not running anything really structured. And he was like, the competitiveness that this guy showed during OTAs, I'm like, this guy's a football player, man. Like he's got that competitive kind of fire to him. Kittle talked about a throw he made during the preseason that was between two safeties against Houston when he hit Ross Dwelley, where he was kind of like, hey, that's an NFL throw.
Special route.
Yeah, he's like, this is something, we could work with. And, Hufanga mentioned that they were, not directly locker mates, but he was 2 over. And he's like, I saw the way he was working every single day, the way he was taking care of his body. So I think the thing with Purdy, too, is that it's not just like he just came in the Miami game and then immediately won all these guys over in a small span of time. I think he incrementally had shown who he was over the course of his time with the 49ers. And there was that confidence in him so that when he did come in and he did hit that, throw against the zero coverage, these guys were like, okay, like we've seen all the stuff behind the scenes. Now he's able to do it when there's, live ammo out there. And Fred Warner even talked about, Fred was like, hey, I had confidence in the guy, but nobody could have told you that he was going to do what he was going to do. And if they did, they'd be lying to you. Like we believed in him, but once you get thrown into the fire and you prove yourself, then it's like, all right, this is somebody we can rock with. So I think the biggest difference really is Brock Purdy had an extensive run in the fire. He played December football. He won 2 games in the playoffs. We just haven't seen Trey Lance in those situations yet. And the closest we've got to it is probably the Texans game, which was a must-win game. They had to win to get in the playoffs during his rookie year, and he played well enough for them to win. So I think the problem, Vish, is that you can talk about all of this belief that these guys have in Brock Purdy and the great things he's done, and people immediately take that and equate it to, well, that means Trey Lance can't do it. That means they don't believe in Trey Lance. To me, it just means one guy has a much more tangible sample size, and that is more valuable than anything they can say during an interview, than anything they can do in workouts. How big they are, how fast they are, how strong they are. Their ability to execute in that setting against NFL defenses will always carry the most weight. And one guy just has more of a sample size in that environment than the other. And I think that's why the players feel so strongly the way that they do.
Yeah, and I think that was really well put, especially the last part, right? Like complimenting one guy is not an indictment of the next guy. And I'm going to be doing this a lot this offseason. And I already got frustrated. I was on Larry Kruger's show. Somehow I don't read YouTube comments except my own. I used to never read them just because, when people look, the social media stuff, let's be real about it. It gets to you sometimes and stuff like that. And if I'm going to provide and present as authentic an opinion as possible, I can't let people get into my head by saying, you can think Vish is an idiot, but if Vish is going to give his opinion that's 100% Vish, you have to think he's an idiot. Or you have to think he's smart, or you have to think he's the worst person ever. Whatever you think, you have to think that about, what I'm truly expressing. And so I somehow ran into a comment and somebody was saying I was criticizing Purdy, and I got hot. And I'm going to do it a lot this offseason. I know it because a lot of people are going to say, hey, you're being critical of Purdy. You're a Lance hater. Well, no, the reality is complimenting one guy isn't necessarily a criticism of the other guy. And I want to leave kind of this show with this because I know a lot of people want to get started on their Super Bowl Sunday, maybe have plans. I don't want to hold you either because you have plans. You may have plans for the Super Bowl. By the way, what are your plans for the Super Bowl?
I am just hanging out at home. I'm going to watch the Super Bowl, hopefully enjoy it. I got an article to write, and then I'll be playing some FIFA later. It's a very relaxed Sunday over here in Jordan's world. So I'll be, just kicking back. Nothing too special.
Okay. That actually sounds like a decent plan for the Super Bowl. I have a few things. I keep saying I'm going to play it by ear and decide what I'm going to do, but ultimately I might choose to do the same as you as well. Wow, that sounds fun. But okay, so not to hold you, but I'll leave this I'll leave this conversation with this, and I think this is the most important thing. There was a quote to me that was the most resounding quote about these two quarterbacks that I've heard, and it came from Jimmy Ward after Brock Purdy's first start. Now, why this quote didn't get this traction, I don't know. I tweeted about it. And I guess nobody likes my tweets, but I'm joking completely. I don't think a lot of people made this connection. But Jimmy Ward talked about Brock Purdy, and he went on and on about how he's seen this in scout team, how he doesn't hesitate in scout team. He consistently takes chances. He throws the ball where it needs to be, doesn't hesitate, and he lets it go. And he said that he thinks he's like that because Brock Purdy is not some first round pick. He's a 7th round pick who's worked his way to get here. And he thinks that he lets it go because he knows if he doesn't let it go, he's not going to get another chance. And so he has to just let it loose and play. And I thought this quote was very resounding, right? It's very complimentary of Brock Purdy and where he's been. And this was Jimmy Ward's quote. But it brings me back to the Fred Warner quote from last year when he said he had to sit Trey Lance down in the middle of the season and say, you got to start throwing the ball and being aggressive because we're not getting the reps we need as a defense on scout team. And it led to, of course, Trey Lance, then the viral videos, right, that the Stanford receiver posted, and then our mutual friend, Javi Vega, the man, put all over Twitter, and it went viral. And those were some sick throws, whatever. But those were two quotes, right, we got from players. And the reason I bring those two things up is because in the little time that I've gotten to see both quarterbacks play, if I had to give you one word that separates the two, it's hesitancy. To me, Trey Lance sees it, but there's something that doesn't let him let the ball go. There's something where sometimes he's looking at it and why aren't you throwing the ball? And if there was one thing that I thought made Brock Purdy the best quarterback that Shanahan's had in 5 years in San Francisco, which I did, those 7 games were the best I thought a quarterback has played in San Francisco under Shanahan. It was the fact that when he saw it, and he does see it, right? He processes it the right way. He lets the ball go. He lets the ball go with timing and accuracy consistently. And to me, that was really, if I had to say a difference between the two players, it was that. And I go back to that quote because to me it's important because it's not an indictment of Trey Lance, right? He needs to go through whatever growth he needs to go through. It's just an example of, to me, how the locker room feels at where the two players are in their development right now. And I thought George Kittle summed it up perfectly this week, right? A lot of people got mad at the quote. I thought it was a perfect summation. Trey Lance has the ability to be that guy. Nobody says he doesn't. There's no reason to even, I would say, other than the injuries, there's no reason to say he can't be that guy because he's almost the exact same player he was coming out of the draft, right? There's not been anything like horrible that you didn't know before the draft that's come up to say he can't reach his potential that you thought he could reach 2 years ago. But there's a level of work that needs to go through to get there, and he's been unlucky and unable to play and go through that to get there. And then Brock Purdy came in, he sees his opportunity, and when he played like that, to me, it just kind of put the bow on the conversation. For now, we'll see what happens. We'll see how both players recover from their injury. But, man, Jordan, it was a pleasure to have you on. This was an awesome show. I need to get you on again. I'm sure I'll get you on to talk a little bit of draft. Talk to me about what your plans are for draft season. What are you planning to really look at? I'm in kind of a weird spot. I'm trying to push my YouTube channel forward a little bit more over this offseason. I have a little bit more time, but a lot of my studying over draft time is going to be nothing 49ers related. And so I'm going to be interested to see how people react to conversation that's maybe not a lot 49ers centric, because I think we talked about this because you and I did a mock draft before together. I told you I'm not interested in studying people that are going in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Like, I can't do the draft that deep. So I try and pick 5 quarterbacks, 5, 6 quarterbacks, 5, 6 running backs, 10 receivers or so, 5, 6 corners, a few safeties, and then linebacker, defensive line, offensive line sprinkled in depending on who I need to watch. And I leave it at that because it's a grind to study. But what's your plan for the draft season? Are you going to be releasing those mock drafts? I remember them last offseason. You were ripping through them.
I'll be honest, this year I probably am farther behind with my draft stuff than I have been. And it's for the exact reason you mentioned. Like, it's so hard to get like enthused about like mocking guys with like the 99th overall pick. And that's the earliest you're going to have the chance to really look at guys. I remember I did a show with Brad Graham 2 years ago, before the draft for the Niners took Trey Lance. And when they made that trade up to get Lance, it was great for all the content, for all the quarterback stuff. It was, an incredible time to be doing stuff. But I remember Brad and I were texting after, and I'm like, dude, like, this is great. Like, I'm happy the Niners are going to, clearly take a quarterback here. This is exciting. This is going to suck for the next 2 years without a first-round pick. Now do they not only not have the first-round pick, they don't have the second-round pick, they don't have the third-round pick. Their first pick's going to be the compensatory ones. So I will be focusing on, Niners stuff. I'm going to be really trying to lock in on those back-to-back-to-back picks. They have 3 picks in a row at the end of the 3rd round there. So that's probably going to be the focus of it. I will be in Indianapolis in 2 weeks at the scouting combine, and I'm going to be doing my best to get some interviews with some guys that hopefully I can, use my detective skills to kind of piece together where the Niners have gone under John Lynch. For example, like last year, I did an interview with Drake Jackson, and I did a pretty extensive interview with Spencer Burford. So when Burford was selected, I was able to go back and I had something foundationally to fall back on, where there were some quotes about him, the potential of playing with a guy like Trent Williams and just getting a feel for those guys kind of, before they're officially on the 49ers. So I'm hoping that I can maybe get 2 or 3 that end up, ultimately being picked by the Niners. But it's so hard when it's, guys that are being taken 5th.
By the way, Jordan, where can people find these interviews and that fantastic article that you wrote about the first moment all these different 49ers players at the Pro Bowl knew when Brock Purdy was that guy?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you go to Niners Nation, I'm writing there pretty much every single day. I'll have something. And if it's not me, there's a great team of people that I have the privilege of working with there. And I know we're really attacking this offseason pretty strong. I think KP and Jason are both going to be with me at the Combine in Indy. So hopefully we'll be able to cover all of our bases. I'm not tweeting as much as I used to. My @'s here on the screen, @SplashCousin. I've been kind of scaling it back, and now I'm sinking into this, like, it's not a depression, but I mean, the Warriors are just like a mess. And so like, I'm like, most of my stuff is me being like bummed about the Warriors and trying to like make light humor of the way their season's going, and a little bit less 49ers stuff. So I'm going to try to bring some balance back. But I do have some of that stuff on Twitter.
You are such a spoiled basketball fan. My God, the Warriors are putting you in a depression. I'm a Detroit Pistons fan.
Well, hey, you got the future GOAT, dude. I mean, I would not be surprised at all.
You know how mad I am? I'll say this. I have suffered. Basically, because the Pistons have been bad my entire lifetime. I've suffered through stupid Brandon Jennings trades, stupid Blake Griffin trades, stupid signing of Josh Smith, thinking Josh Smith, Rodney Stuckey, Andre Drummond, and Greg Monroe on the floor together, 4 players who can't shoot, was going to work in 2015 in the modern NBA. So I've suffered through all of that. If they start James Wiseman and he starts eating at Jalen Duren's minutes, And if they give James Wiseman a second contract and I have to see Wiseman and Bagley on the court together, arguably the worst defensive front court in NBA history, I'm done. I'm not going to watch the Detroit Pistons anymore. I can't stand it. I'm so mad that they traded, not even that they traded Saddiq Bey. I didn't really want to pay him, but then why didn't they trade Bogdanovich? They probably could have gotten a first. Why did they trade for James Wiseman? Like, we're in the midst of this run to get the most generational center talent we've seen since what, Embiid? Maybe beyond that, maybe since Hakeem. And we get James. Oh God, Jordan. I don't want to hear about any depression from the Warriors.
I've been a fan of the Warriors since they were terrible. Like, my favorite Warriors player of all time is Jason Richardson, who, when the team wasn't very good, was the reason why I watched basketball.
Right.
And so them winning last year, I'm good. They could not win. They could not make the playoffs for the next 10 years, and I'm gonna always be grateful. I watched them win 4. I never thought I'd see them win 1.
Right.
I want to make that very clear. To me, what's frustrating is that, like, they have all this talent and they should be a team that's really good. And I've watched them for the better part of 10 years, literally almost 10 years, be this just efficient, dynamic, like the closest thing to I never saw Joe Montana and Steve Young and those guys. So it's the closest thing to like having that generational kind of team here in the Bay Area that I'll ever get the chance to see. And dude, they're playing like a summer league team when it gets to a close game in the fourth quarter. And I'm like, how do you have all of this talent, all of this, you got Kenny Atkinson, Steve Kerr, this like all-star coaching staff, and they're just like fumbling away games, taking dumb shots at the worst times. And it's just like, depression is not the right word because I'm spoiled rotten with how good they've been. It's just like mind numbing. Like, I'm like, how is this even happening? But yeah, I agree. Like, I'm not going to sit here and like expect sympathy when they literally won the title last year. That's a completely fair argument.
Right. I was going to say, and I understand, I kind of transition into basketball season usually right after the new year. That's usually a good time to like get started. Obviously, I'm following box scores, maybe catching one on like a Tuesday, Wednesday night, but it's hard with football season, especially now that I've had to talk about football. There's a little bit more pressure to actually put in the hours studying and watching and learning. Rather than when I didn't have to talk about it or anything, it was more hobby. There was never the pressure that, I might not have something to say, or I might misrepresent something, or it might be totally inaccurate. And so, man, it's been hard to really watch basketball, but I don't know how Warriors fans can have it. I still think, in fact, like, there was a time earlier this year when I thought that no matter what, they would bounce back in the playoffs. I'm not that confident when I look at that
right
team.
there with you, yeah.
But I still look at the Western Conference, and I think you get Steph Curry healthy. Clay is back to offensively being maybe as good as Clay has ever been. Draymond has had a pretty strong season, all things considered, top to bottom. Like, how can you rule those 3 guys out? What, they haven't lost a playoff series when all three of those guys are healthy since what, 2016 when they lost to the Cavs?
Yeah, exactly. And like, Draymond missed a game, so it depends where you. But yeah, like, that's literally the only time that it's happened in the last like 10 years, and it's just like, I'm with you, dude. I think it's just like, it's really hard to count out a team like that, and I don't think anybody wants to play them. But I also think it would be foolish to just like, I'm like, oh, dude, they'll figure it out. They're just bored, or they're, it's a hangover from the championship. They celebrated all summer. They'll figure it out. I think the problem is that they used to be able to have this like 5 to 7 minute run where they just locked in and they'd put teams away. And I don't know if it's like an athleticism thing or if it's just like a chemistry thing. They just don't have that like extra gear that they've had. And so they're losing a lot of these games to bad teams that normally they would NBA games, 48 minutes? They'd have to play serious for 8 of those 48 minutes, and they'd end up winning a lot of those games. They don't have that luxury anymore. And I wonder if they're like struggling to find their footing in this unknown territory where it's like, oh shit, we don't have this like extra gear where we can just light a team up in the third quarter and put a game away anymore.
Well said. Well, Jordan, this was awesome to have you. This is an awesome show. Please like and subscribe, everybody. Make sure you check out Jordan's work on Niners Nation. I truly mean this when I say this. I don't know if there's a more hardworking person in that I have met in my little time doing this. Jordan really has had a dream and made it happen, and he's continuing to make it happen. Make sure you go support his work. The guy is really, really working hard to make this happen for himself, and I'm really happy as someone who's been able to meet him and going through this process, and I would say I call him a friend, to be part of watching this happen. So make sure you go check out his work. It's really detailed. It's in depth. Like he just said, he got Spencer Burford interviews and Drake Jackson interviews, 2 months before they were drafted. So if you're looking for some more insight on the 49ers, you know where to find it. But thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, please like, subscribe. Make sure you check out Jordan's work, and I'll see you next time. I left the studio without ending the podcast. My bad. Have a great rest of the day,